Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Joyful Balance podcast. You're being entertained here by Denise, myself, a cognitive behavioral hypnotherapist, and my lovely co-host, Meera, neuroscientist and nutritional therapist. Joyful Balance podcast is all about neuroscience, nutrition, and psychology, and we are just at the intersection between all of these. And we are just trying to help guide you understand yourself better, build better relationships with yourself, food, other people, and also we are sharing our own personal experience and taking you on this journey together with us. We are not know-it-alls, but we do love science, so that's what we are here to do, try to educate everybody with what we know and also learn about new things. On this episode, we are going to be very attracted to neurotransmitters. Right?
Kind of, yeah.
Oh.
It's we're doing a bit of a journey all around neurotransmitters, hormones, and how they affect your appetite.
Ooh.
Yeah, so that's kind
I'm
of...
hungry just by saying that.
To be fair, we are recording this at what is normally dinner time, so that's totally understandable. But yeah, I'm going to try and let you know all about how your appetite works, and hopefully tell you some interesting things that you've not heard before.
I'm intrigued.
Okay, so I've encouraged Denise, everyone, to interrupt me when I get on a lecture train, so that hopefully this is very entertaining for you guys to listen to. We'll definitely talk about our own experiences along the way. And yeah, I'll just get going.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. So the one thing to actually really remember is that appetite is not actually governed by just one thing.
Okay.
So your appetite really depends on a mixture of genetic, can you believe it, environmental and hormone factors. So
Sorry, you already blew my mind. So what do you... I thought appetite is because I'm hungry because I'm hungry.
No, so there's actually two different types of hunger, and I'm going to go on to that in a second.
Okay.
So, and actually, I'm going to get to that point right now. So, appetite and the decision to eat and the action to eat is actually dependent on two interacting systems. There's what we call the homeostatic system, which is basically to ensure that you get enough calories to survive. Mm-hmm. So that's what we traditionally, I guess, think of hunger as being a cue that you need to eat because you're hungry. But there's actually another very important system that often interacts a lot, especially with the way we live life now with food being far more available, is the hedonic system. So this regulates your experience of pleasure and reward around eating. So it's not just that we eat for calorie and energy and nutritional intake, we also eat for pleasure. And so I'm going to take you on a whistle-stop tour of both these things, and also about some things that you might not think that actually affect your appetite that do. Now, in a previous podcast episode, I talked about how your brain kind of works and all the different areas that are involved in brain function. And one of the key structures that I mentioned was this tiny area called there's so many. There's the hippocampus and the hypothalamus, and I'm trying to say both at the same time. But this time I'm talking about your hypothalamus. So your hypothalamus is a hugely important part of like your emotional regulation, but it also helps to regulate your appetite as well. And there's in fact basically three different areas within that tiny space in the middle of your brain that plays a role in regulating your appetite. So I could name them, and I don't expect you to remember them, but there's the paraventricular nucleus that is all around control sort of the hormonal aspects of appetite. So things like your thyroid function, your cortisol, which is your stress hormones, and also oxytocin, which is another really important hormone. You've then got the ventromedial hypothalamus, which actually works to suppress your desire to eat. And then there's also, interestingly, the lateral hypothalamus, which basically refers to an aspect like the location within the hypothalamus, but it essentially stimulates our search for calorie-dense food. And I'm going to come back to why that's important. But essentially, all of these three interact together in a very small space to control your appetite. Now, yeah, go on.
Question.
Yeah.
The one that is suppressing, do you know... I mean, it's genuinely, I don't know if you know the answer. Is that the one As in, it's not your area of expertise. That's what I'm trying to say.
No, I know, yeah.
Is that the place, or is that the area that something crazy such as weight loss pills are trying to affect, so that it suppresses the appetite, i.e. you don't eat?
Yeah, it's either that, or I imagine it works on the hormones.
Okay.
Because there's actually a lot of you've also got 3 sets of hormones, which I'm going to cover very quickly in a minute, that also affect your appetite. I mean, to be honest, I don't have a lot of experience with diet weight loss pills, because I don't encourage them.
Yes,
whatsoever.
of course. Me neither. I was just thinking
No,
when
I
you
know,
said
but yeah, I don't think it will necessarily. It may work on the neurotransmitters to do with appetite, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But I have a feeling it's actually more to do with the hormones. But I could be wrong.
okay.
Yeah, but actually, what I'll do is put a pin in that, and I will find out the answer, and I will put it in a post on Instagram.
Thank
so
you.
please do come back to our Instagram page if that's a question that is of interest to you. Okay, so you've got these 3 nuclei all in the hypothalamus. They all work together to basically decide whether you do or don't eat. Now, it's not only just this tiny area in your brain that has an effect, but it's also 3 hormones that also work centrally within your body to regulate your appetite. So there's one called leptin, and that's produced by your adipose tissue, which is basically another word for your fat cells. And they act on receptors in the nucleus in the hypothalamus to promote a sense of fullness. But you've also then on the other flip side, you've got another hormone called ghrelin, which is produced by your gastrointestinal system, and that increases your sense of hunger. It will reduce energy expenditure to basically keep you going, and it also stimulates the release of cortisol, and that's important. And cortisol is actually another hormone that's involved in your appetite. And cortisol you release when you're more stressed. And the reason that your body does this is because it actually helps your body to release glucose, which is your main source of fuel. It's basically sugar that your cells burn to make energy. So basically, it's just to make sure that you have enough energy to respond to whatever's going on in life. Now, the thing with cortisol that you've got to be really careful of is that having chronically quite high levels of cortisol will mean that your body's response to leptin, which is that one that encourages that sense of fullness, of satiety as we call it, it actually blunts that. It blunts that response. It's harder for you to feel full and satisfied. And therefore, as a result, you can often find that you're reaching for foods that are high in sugar and fat, basically comfort food. And it can lead to an increased amount of accumulation of abdominal fat. And that's particularly dangerous when we're thinking about overall health and well-being. But don't panic. There are plenty of ways that, we can cover cortisol, a whole episode on cortisol in itself and how you can actually lower that.
Yes, please. Please.
Yeah,
That's my number one enemy.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I get it. Yeah, it's basically your stress hormone, and it's really important that we understand cortisol and how we can actually learn to lower it ourselves, which we absolutely can do. So that's the homeostatic side of hunger. So that's more like all your different kind of hormones and your different neurons that are involved in managing hunger, and that's more around the calorie side of things and actually maintaining, the status quo in your body. But you've also got the pleasure and reward aspect of food, and this is the bit that I particularly find quite interesting. So, as I've mentioned, eating can be, and hopefully it is for most of us, if not everybody, is actually a really pleasurable experience. And, and the way that your body responds to the pleasure of food is actually very similar to how the circuits in your brain that respond to other things that we find pleasurable, such as drug and sex. So, although we don't encourage...
Does the same part of the brain light up?
They're overlapping areas. Oh. Yeah. So there may be ones that I've mentioned before, but certainly the amygdala I've talked about before, that's associated with emotional learning. So that's where we learn to put behaviours together with emotions. You've got other areas called the ventral tegmental area, which is very key, and I'm going to talk about in a second why this matters. But it contains neurons that use dopamine as their neurotransmitter, and dopamine is massively important because it signals our sense of pleasure and reward, and it basically when we experience pleasure and reward to something, we are behaviorally motivated to continue seeking it out, which is why things become, kind of addictive, and why we constantly want to seek out things that bring us pleasure. Like it becomes a motivation.
So is that sugar?
Yeah, absolutely. Sugar's hugely rewarding.
I heard something, and it might have been from you or from somebody else, that sugar, in the sense of the hit we get from sugar, is very similar to the one from cocaine.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
In the sense of the part of the brain,
it's the same parts of the brain. Yeah. Like with other things like that you find pleasurable, such as, I mean, obviously we don't encourage it, but taking drugs and sex. So yeah, it's all overlapping areas, and that's why you can have addictions to food, you can have addictions to drugs, you can have addictions to sex. Like you can have an addiction to pretty much anything that brings you pleasure. Gambling can be another one, although that's also to do with the high you get out of a sense of risk. But yeah, these are all overlapping areas, and explains why, if you imagine how powerfully addictive some things are, it's very easy to imagine that you can do the same with food. And especially, and a lot of foods like comfort foods, junk foods, are designed to really play on that pleasure center and to really give you that hit of dopamine, which is why you want to come back to those foods again and again and again. So what I want you to take away from understanding that there is a real sense of pleasure, a real element of pleasure to eating food, is that when you feel like your eating's out of control, or if you're feeling that way, or if you're feeling that you're leaning on comfort foods a lot, they are designed to play on this very system. So please don't sit there and think, oh my God, it's totally my fault, it's all out of control, I'm never going to be able to learn to have a better relationship with food. No, it's just know that some of these foods are designed to play on the way that your brain works. And understanding how your brain works means that you have the power to not manipulate it, but to use it to your own advantage.
That's very interesting, because I read something where they were designing excuse me, they were designing food, as you say, to play into this particular quote unquote trap. It's not a trap, but playing in that particular area of the brain to trap you into wanting more and more and more.
Yeah.
And they were saying it was something connected between the right amount of sugar, salt, and trans fats.
Yeah.
And they almost like they engineered it in such a way.
100%. Yeah. Totally. Like, and that's and I'm going to kind of come back to why that then becomes a continual problem as well. But absolutely, like, they do design these foods, unfortunately, to really play on these areas. And therefore, you want to come back to get that same hit of dopamine. But this is like, so although these systems are normally quite good at being, what your body is amazing at is always trying to maintain balance, always. And what we start to see is it can almost have a slightly unintended negative consequence, and I'm going to explain that now. So we know that we've got the area in the hypothalamus that's involved in the homeostatics and making sure you get enough calories. You've then got the hormonal system that helps you balance between feeling full and feeling hungry. And then you've also got dopamine that helps you feel a sense of reward. But the dopamine is more around the sense of pleasure, as opposed to being purely about your metabolism and stuff like that. But these systems, they can go wrong. And so there's some really interesting thoughts about what happens when these system goes wrong, and how neuroscience applies to appetite. So with obesity, for example, what they find is that, your body's like releasing leptin, which, as I mentioned, promotes that sense of fullness, that sense of satiety. But actually, when you're having chronically high levels of leptin, perhaps because you are eating more than normal, your body can start to become really resistant to that signal, a bit in the same way that your body becomes resistant to insulin when you're constantly having sugar. And as a result, that your cells, basically, they just stop listening in an attempt to regulate your body's hormonal systems. And as a result, your brain becomes blunted, and it just doesn't listen to leptin in the same way, so you don't get that same sense of fullness.
Does eating very quickly play into this?
I think what eating really quickly does is that it takes time for your body to recognize that you're full. So as a result, it's much easier to overeat when you do eat fast, which is why as a nutritionist, like when you're trying to encourage, regulating your appetite, like we will encourage you to try and eat slowly, eat mindfully, pay attention to the food that you're eating, because not only are you giving yourself more of a chance to enjoy the food and get that reward from the tastes and all that sort of stuff, you're also giving time for your body to recognize when you're getting full. Because what happens is it's not just your brain that's governing how hungry you are, and your hormonal system, and it's not just your brain that's deciding how hungry you are, but it's also what happens is when your stomach stretches, that's when it starts to release hormones to let you know that you're full. But for those signals to kind of coalesce into, just hit the microphone there. But for that to coalesce to let you know that it's full, it takes time for your brain to register. So that's why we always encourage you to try and eat slower, especially when it comes to regulating your appetite. Now, as Denise and I were just chatting about, your dopamine is really, really important. And so foods that are high in salt, fats and sugar, they cause that release of dopamine. And when you get that hit, the way that dopamine system is designed is that it encourages you to keep trying to reach for that reward. But also when you're constantly supplying yourself with dopamine, a bit like you can get resistant to leptin, your body tries to regulate the amounts of dopamine and it starts to switch off some of the receptors. So basically, like, it's like you can't get your keys in the door.
What do you mean?
So like your brain stops listening to the amount of dopamine, like it shuts down the receptors so that you don't register it as much, which means that to try and get that same reward, you're having to have more and more to build up more dopamine to hit the receptors to get that sense of pleasure. So
just I was listening to another podcast completely unrelated, and
how dare you listen to another podcast, Denise?
There's
only hours. No, I'm kidding.
She listens to more than me.
I do.
So
I'm a podcast addict.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in that particular, what you've just said resonated with my memory of that episode, because they were talking about drug addiction, and they were talking about addiction, not of necessarily drugs, but they were talking about addiction and why over time you need more and more of a higher dose.
Yep.
So I assume it's to put it simplistically, it's similar in the sense that our bodies got used to dopamine, and it's like you need to release even more and more and more in order to get the hit.
Yeah, because your brain is like shutting down receptors because it's like there's too much dopamine. I need to close receptors to maintain normal status quo in the body, and as a result it's harder. Your brain cells are like it's harder for them to hear the dopamine, which means you just need more in order to latch onto all those receptors, because that's the way that neurotransmitters work. They kind of like, that's the neurotransmitter. I've got one hand in a ball and then the other is in like an open claw, and they kind of lock together. So if it starts to shut down the receptors, your dopamine is not being registered, and so you need more and more to try and get that same registration to get that same hit. And so it's not just it's not just also about these systems and how they're involved in obesity, but also how they think, scientists are beginning to uncover that actually these same systems could be not working properly in the case of eating disorders. So for example, with anorexia, there's a thought process that perhaps there's a breakdown in your body listening to cortisol, because when you're not eating enough, your cortisol levels go up. There's also a sense that there's a faulty reward system, so your dopamine system isn't quite working properly. Plus there's a fear of food that's overriding the desire to eat. So all of these things together coalesce into, your body's also it's releasing all these stress hormones because you're starving. You've kind of got this fear of food, plus a reward system that's not working properly. And these things all coalesce, unfortunately, into and kind of contribute to the disorder. Although obviously there's a much wider piece around your relationship to food and what food means to you and what weight means to you and all those things that I couldn't possibly cover in these 5 seconds. But with bulimia and binge eating, and bulimia is the way that it differs to anorexia is anorexia where there is, in very layman's terms, is where you don't eat or you try and make sure that your calorie burning far exceeds what you're taking in. Bulimia is you kind of go through the cycle of binge eating and then typically purging. So you'll make yourself ill after the fact, which I can't imagine how well, either one is just really awful and really sad. But it's with bulimia and binge eating, there's also a thought that there's a faulty reward system when it comes to with food. Interestingly, both these disorders have a element of impulsivity. So we're actually, they think, which I think is really interesting, is you have a higher sensitivity to the reward of food, and that's paired with a lower ability to inhibit certain behaviors. And as I talked about in the previous episode, your hypothalamus is right in the seat of, in the middle of your brain, and it's a very archaic part of your brain. And later you develop the prefrontal cortex, which is how you control all your impulsive behaviors. It's basically your policing station that, like, instead of like throwing a glass against the wall when you're really angry, you stop and take a breath. That's your prefrontal cortex. So it's thought that actually not only are you more sensitive to the reward of food, so it feels even more rewarding, you also don't have that inhibitory control to stop you from the binging in the first place. So as a result, you are just way more responsive to food rewards and cues, and the cravings just override that homeostatic feeding mechanism. And it's much more difficult for you to overcome that temptation to eat. So I think what I wanted to take away from all of this is that please don't feel like, what I wanted to say is that the science of appetite is far more complex than you think it is. I've talked about at least one neurotransmitter, 3 different hormones, and I'm not even, and even insulin, which you release after you eat, in response to there being more glucose in your blood. Insulin works to suppress your appetite. So, it just goes to show that actually there are some really powerful forces that are at work when it comes to your appetite. And it's not a simple thing of like, you don't have self-control, or there's something wrong with you per se. It's actually got some really powerful, really ingrained biochemical things that are driving your appetite as well. But that doesn't mean that there aren't ways that you can learn to work with the way that your body and brain work in order to engage in the feeding behaviors that are truly helpful and benefit you. So
how would you do that? So if you had somebody as a client that is really struggling, I'm not necessarily thinking about anorexia or bulimia because those are very complex.
Yeah, they are.
I'm just saying, somebody who is maybe or more on the obese side and they don't have the best relationship with food, or how would you see it from your practice point of view?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think when it comes to the relationship with food, one, if we definitely did have someone with who we thought at any point had signs of an eating disorder, we would always straight away refer to someone who's a nutritionist who's got a special eating disorder additional qualification, because that's an extra, I can't remember how many months or years of training. But in terms of having a better relationship with food, I think, if we felt it was appropriate, we would absolutely refer to a therapist and say you may want to work on the psychology side of things, but also just understand what are their daily habits and what's their relationship with food actually like. And also, if it's a case of they're using dopamine as a comfort or as a reward, what are the other techniques and tools that you can use to try and get that dopamine hit that don't involve food? So things like going for exercising can raise dopamine, for example. Science has found that cold showers can raise dopamine as well.
Cold showers?
Yeah. So having that blast of a cold shower.
Is that why people take those cold showers in the morning and cold baths and things?
Yeah. It can actually raise your dopamine levels. People get a massive high from it.
Wow.
So there are other techniques that you can employ to basically raise your dopamine levels without necessarily having to engage in the feeding behaviors. But also we can work to find foods that are still really satisfying. So whether that's we will work with your hormones. So for example, we will always look to balance your insulin levels, because and in doing so, we manage your blood sugar levels, and managing your blood sugar levels is so important because one, it prevents you from getting, when your blood sugar levels drop, you get hangry, you get really irritable. I personally get super anxious. I can feel really nauseated. And when you're on a really big blood sugar high, you can often still get that irritability irritability and anxiousness. So what we're trying to do is prevent you from going on this roller coaster of emotional ups and downs, and that will affect your feeding behavior, because insulin, as I've mentioned, which your body releases when you have sugar to try and bring your sugar levels back down, it affects your appetite. But also when your blood sugar levels kind of skyrocket and dip, it affects your cortisol levels. And when it starts to affect your stress hormone levels, that again impacts your feeding behavior. So, you may find that you're reaching, for example, for more comfort foods. Again, it affects your appetite. So what we're trying to do, what we're always trying to do is we're trying to also balance your hormones so that it helps to regulate your appetite that much more. So that's kind of the way that we approach it. So, we may look to add, we may also look to increase the amount of, for example, to make dopamine, you need an amino acid called tyrosine. So you might increase tyrosine-rich foods to basically encourage your body to make dopamine naturally. We'll employ a lot of auxiliary techniques to help you slowly, learn to regulate your appetite, and also find other ways of raising the dopamine levels without necessarily having to reach for as many of the comfort foods. But these things are always a learning process, right? It takes time for your brain to change and mold. And what I'd always say is I never do things wham, you've got to start this whole new thing from tomorrow. What we really encourage you to do is a really step-by-step gentle process, as gentle as we can be, in order to basically set you up for long-term success.
And what you're saying, at least what I'm hearing, is that there isn't one, let's say, culprit of something going wrong with our appetite. There can be a myriad of things, and they all work together, sometimes to our detriment.
And it may even just be that stress, for example, is causing you to reach out for the comfort foods because it's affecting your, cortisol is resulting in you feeling less full. So you're just reaching for more foods. You're reaching for more comfort foods, whether that's psychologically or because it's giving you that dopamine hit. So it may be actually also our prescription, or not prescription, but our advice is to lower your stress levels, which has actually got nothing to do with your eating behavior, really, directly. So it might be hey, do some more meditation, again, going out for exercise, doing whatever therapeutically helps you to reduce your stress levels. So there's no magic bullet. There never is. There hardly ever is with nutrition. It's kind of a very holistic way of looking at what life looks like for you and how we can work to address some of the issues that you have. It may also be, sleep. If you're not sleeping enough, that can affect your stress levels. That will affect your metabolism. And then therefore that has an effect on your feeding behavior.
I was nodding profusely because that's the side of the coin that I see in my practice. I work with people who are, sleep deprived or insomniacs, or, and then the ones that are struggling with their stress levels and with their weight, and they are not, they're not happy in their current situation. And what I realize, I don't give nutritional advice because that is not my space and not my place to do so. But what I realize with all of these indications is that one is linked to the other. I.e., if you are struggling with chronic insomnia, you are not really the best at managing stress. Therefore, you might not be eating the best nutrition food that you need to have, and it becomes a vicious circle. But now, through what you're saying to us and what you're educating us about, it's also the mechanics of our brains can also fail us in some ways because of the different aspects.
And also, food manufacturers have failed us, unfortunately, and made these incredibly enticing, wonderful foods, some of which are touted as being super healthy, but they have a detrimental, they can have a detrimental effect on your health. So but there's one other thing that I think we also forget to consider, that is actually, scientists are now beginning to examine a lot more, is the gut microbiome, and how that actually influences appetite as well. So just as a very quick recap, I think I've covered this in episode 2, I think it was 4 or 5. The one where sorry guys, the one where I talk a lot about the brain and how the brain and the gut are linked. you have trillions of bacteria that live in your gut. You've thousands of species, and they all perform a slightly different function. And you need a forest, an ecosystem of different gut bacteria, because they do a myriad of functions, including helping you digest your food. They help you make the majority of some of your body's neurotransmitters. They help you make certain vitamins, like vitamin K, for example, and certain B vitamins. So they have a hugely important role in your health and well-being, including in your mental and brain health. But also, they can influence the amount of hormones related to fullness and sense of satiety. And as a result, they can they can increase your food intake. So actually, your gut bacteria massively play a role in essentially what your appetite is doing, the secretion of those hormones, leptin, ghrelin, and insulin as well. And they can produce neurotransmitters like serotonin, which also affects your appetite. So there are certain bacteria that can either increase or decrease leptin. And scientists are still trying to work out exactly how this works, but essentially they can affect your leptin levels. They can also affect your ghrelin as well, so it can result in either more or less ghrelin being produced. So it actually can work to either increase or decrease your appetite. I think with ghrelin, it seems to more at the moment result in a reduced appetite, but also it can affect your insulin levels. So actually, something that you wouldn't have even thought of as being important to your appetite, or actually being important apart from a very specific digestive, slightly brain health role, is that it actually has a massive influence on your behaviour. Isn't that fascinating?
Absolutely. And what I find even more fascinating, and sorry if I'm taking you on a tangent, is that we've been more or less educated to believe that there are good and bad bacteria in our gut.
I mean, there are certain species that are helpful, and there are ones that are harmful. But the caveat is that you need a balance of different bacteria because they do different jobs, and it's actually having certain a sum of certain bacteria that aren't healthy is actually kind of a good thing, because your good bacteria keeps them in check in terms of numbers, and I think it actually helps your immune system recognize that they are bad.
But that's what I mean, in the sense that they are all there for a purpose. They all serve a purpose. Obviously, when one is exceeding the others,
it becomes problematic.
Exactly. When there is an imbalance in the ecosystem, when the, let's call a bad, quote unquote, guys are running the show, obviously there is something gone wrong. But I think nowadays what people tend to do is that, oh, this is good bacteria and this is bad bacteria, and they almost make like this separation, distinction, like they do with food. Oh, this is the good food, this is the bad food. And I don't agree with the good and the bad.
No, it's funny, with most science, when you get really deep into any science subject, lay people through no fault of their own think there's always a black and white answer to everything. So like in my day job, you'll be like, well, Meera, doesn't this bacteria do this and that's good? And I'm like, yes, but that's always my answer. Yes, but in this case, blah blah blah, it actually means something less than helpful. And so whenever you get deep into the science of anything, you realize that it's very rarely a binary answer.
Just like in psychology, guys.
Just like in psychology,
There are many shades of grey.
Yeah. I mean, like, obviously science, the way that it works, and this complete tangent, is that it's always looking to thing to be aware of in scientific research and discovery, and what should be the status quo, is that you can never prove something, you can only disprove. You can find lots of evidence for something being true, but any scientist worth their salt can very rarely uses, if ever, the word proved, because you can only disprove in science.
Yes, because we are still developing and we are still learning as a race. I'm just saying. We're still.
Yeah.
I mean, we know more about outer space than we know about our brain.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. The brain is the most like undiscovered organ by a country mile. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I feel like that is in a way true to do for science, to just disprove things.
Oh yeah.
And further
yeah.
develop. But I think sometimes with us, the regular Jane and Joe and others, we just take it as gospel, and then we go on a run and we go to the pharmacy and get the product that says this is the good bacteria.
Yeah, yeah. And I think I mean, this do you know what? This opens up a whole debate around. Do you know what I'm going to say?
Yeah.
Go on. What do you think I'm going to say?
Probiotics and prebiotics.
No, I was going to talk about antidepressants.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's fine. No, but we should cover that in another episode because, there's been some really interesting bits of research coming out about that. But anyway, we'll cover that another time.
Yes.
What I did want to say, speaking of prebiotics, is essentially probiotics refer to they literally mean pro-life. So it's the bacteria that support our well-being in some shape or form. Now, you can get those in supplemental form. You can find them naturally in foods to help rebalance your bacteria. So things like kefir, which is fermented milk.
Kimchi,
thank you. Sauerkraut.
Basically fermented
kombucha.
stuff.
Exactly. Thank you.
Our ancestors were
not
happy
beer.
bunnies.
Yeah,
yes. Yeah. No, but I mean our ancestors in the sense of our grandparents and great grandparents.
Food.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah. So now you can also get it in supplement form, whether it be powders or capsules or whatever. But what you can also do is you can manipulate your gut bacteria by actually what you eat in terms of not necessarily probiotics, but what are called prebiotics. Prebiotics are specific types of fiber that will basically feed different groups of bacteria in your gut and help them grow and proliferate. So actually, it's amazing that manipulating your diet can actually manipulate your microbiome, which is really amazing. So certain bacteria can also affect your body weight as well, partly through affecting all the different hormones that are in your body, and this is what they're beginning to really start to uncover, and so you can do that through having different prebiotics in your diet to grow different probiotic bacteria, etc.
We need an episode on that. I'm really keen to hear all about that. So I think I will be taking as many notes as you are going to be in that episode.
But you know what's amazing is like the gut bacteria also can affect the way that you, they found that the oral microbiomes, the microbiome in your mouth affects the way that you perceive taste. For example, it can affect the way that you process thoughts related to food. It affects your impulsivity and your compulsivity to eat. And it's thought to actually play a role in cocaine and addiction and alcohol dependency. Yeah.
I relate to what you've just said, minus the last sentence. I'm not addicted to either of those substances.
That's good to know. Yeah.
Thank you. But it's just when I started eating slowly and I applied it to anything.
Yeah.
Anything that passed through my lips, I said I will eat slowly. My taste changed.
Yeah.
My preference for taste changed. Things that I would normally have found really, dopamine enhancing.
Yeah.
I was just like,
yeah.
And I wouldn't eat it. I can't eat it anymore. And I think I am just the living example, and I'm sure there are more like me out there, where when things have changed a little bit, the microbiome in my mouth and taste buds and things like that have literally shifted.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, we don't like this anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't get the dopamine anymore from it. And the other really, for me, was mind-boggling, is that I used to call myself not a fussy eater.
Okay.
And I assumed being a fussy eater is like, a spoiled child that doesn't want to eat this and doesn't want to. I was having that image whenever I heard somebody, even as an adult, if they were saying they are fussy eaters, I would imagine this kind of small child throwing the food out of, the tray, not wanting to try anything new. And I call myself the antidote for that. I will eat anything minus coriander. Now,
missing out. But yeah, carry on.
Now with this, with the eating slowly, with the making my own journey through, establishing a better relationship with food in general, I realized I am a fussy eater.
Yeah.
But not in the sense that I imagined fussy eaters are, but in the sense of I just don't like many things.
Yeah.
I don't enjoy them anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't have the dopamine hit you were just mentioning.
Yeah, I think it's like, what was I going to say related to this? Now it's completely gone out of my brain. But you can, I think you can really change your taste buds, whether that's down to the oral microbiome, I can't say for certain. But you absolutely can learn to have a different relationship with food, and your taste perceptions will change when you start to change your diet. And it could very well be through the oral microbiome. But if you're used to having quite sweet foods, and suddenly that, no matter how sweet something is, it doesn't quite satisfy that craving. When you start to pare back the amount of sugar that you're having, you will find things taste like overly sweet, and you just don't enjoy them anymore.
I am like that with cakes now.
Yeah.
I've never had a sweet tooth. I always been more of a savory type of person. But now if you give me a regular cake, if I didn't make it, it's overly sweet.
Yeah. Can I say something really controversial about cake? I actually don't really like cake.
I know my best friend doesn't like it either.
I just don't think there's anything like that. Don't get me wrong. I have the biggest sweet tooth, and it's something that I continually have to monitor and be very aware of. But cake just never did it for me. I think it's a spongy texture. It's just like, what's the point? Cheesecake, I can get behind.
Sorry.
Sorry,
it's right into the microphone.
Derailing the conversation.
No, I'm with you with cheesecake. I like cakes.
It's probably because it's so much fattier. It's just much more satisfying.
I don't know if it's about the satisfaction thing. For me, with cake, I have to be honest. I do not like Victoria sponge cake unless it's well moist. I know some people hate this word. Don't hate me for it. That's how my taste buds grew up with sponges that had some sort of syrup in them, so they weren't dry.
Yeah.
They were quite moisture was retained within the actual composition of the sponge, and then obviously layers. Now if you give me this kind of sponge with some sort of just frosting or icing, then you're gonna kill me. I will never eat it. But if you throw in all sorts of fruits and different flavors, then I will get behind it. But again, I have to make it because otherwise it's overly sweet since my journey.
But total random sidebar about cake. But when it comes in your practice, how you approach someone who is not eating, or not eating, but as in who's worried about their weight and wants to change, how are you working with the psychology of that to try and help someone adapt their relationship with food?
The first one, I asked them to, we do different exercises to become more aware of when are these episodes happening. And episodes, I'm saying either over or under eating, because if they're unhappy with their weight, then something is, astray somewhere. And I would start with this, is it a stress-related thing, or is it an emotional thing that you eat, or we're trying to understand more or less the cause from a psychological point of view. And then the next step that I almost every time say to everybody that I meet is eat slowly. The slower, the better. Make a contest with whomever you have around you, even with yourself. Just eat very, very, very slowly, as in take a mouthful, leave your utensil on the table, chew the food, and then come back, take another mouthful, because as you were saying earlier, it takes time for the body to realize
it's full.
It's full, but also it changes your reaction to that particular food and taste. Because if you eat, I don't know, French fries, if you eat them very quickly and they are salty and they are the right recipe made by that particular manufacturer, and you're going to love them instantly, and you had them all, you don't really realize what you've done, what you've eaten. You didn't really register.
Yeah.
You didn't necessarily enjoy it because it was all very, very quick. But if you do it very slowly, you might end up realizing you don't like them that much.
Yeah, I think like
That's what I would, without getting into the whole picture, because that is quite a long assessment that I do with people.
Of course.
But the first two is becoming aware and eating very slowly.
Yeah, and actually there's value in really chewing your food anyway, because it helps to break down, it helps your, you've got digestive enzymes in your saliva anyway, which are really important for digesting food. And also chewing it, you're increasing the surface area around your food, so you actually just digest it better anyway.
You digest it better, then the overall system is happier, you enjoy the taste.
You might get more of a dopamine release anyway, because you're actually enjoying the food.
And you're present with it.
Yeah.
And also from a psychological point of view, you take a break.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, if you eat slowly, not in front of the TV, not while reading a book, not while doing, we all love to think that we are multitaskers. Newsflash.
We're not.
We're not.
Yeah.
We are not built as multitaskers. We've developed it as a skill set. But if you do one thing at a time, you will get better results in that particular one thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, that's kind of what I wanted to cover this episode. I hope it was useful.
It was definitely useful. I think my takeaway is how important the gut microbiome is.
Your gut microbiome is, so I suppose, what are the key things I want you to take away? Remember that appetite, there's two types of appetite. There's the metabolic appetite, which actually is around whether you need calories because you've run out or you're not digesting anything because you are actually empty. And then there's also the pleasurable aspect to food. And don't underestimate how powerful that pull of pleasure to get that reward actually is. And that means that if you are sitting there, listener, and worried about your relationship with food, or not feeling like it's where you would like it to be, please don't. I don't want you to sit there thinking that it's entirely your fault and that you're not, that you're to blame or you don't have the self-control. You do. It just takes practice to engage it. And it's also, and these are also very powerful neurotransmitters that also are involved in a lot of addictive behaviors. I'm not saying that you're addicted to food, but I'm just saying that this is how powerful they actually are. Having said that, there are ways that you can manipulate how these hormones work in a positive way, so that your body is listening to the signals that you're getting around fullness, around actually when you are hungry. They just take practice and skill to employ, but they are very much doable. And don't neglect your microbiome, because that's also hugely important to your sense of appetite as well.
Yeah. I very, very good summary. I completely agree with everything you've said, and I would but I would add, be kind to yourself. Whatever your relationship with food, with appetite is today, just be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up. That is not the right one, or is not at the place that you want it to be. Just be kind and seek solutions if you think that's where you need to improve.
Yeah, and just to add to that, even if you struggle to be kind to yourself, because I do, and my relationship with food can be very up and down, even as a nutritionist, and it's something that I'll cover at another time. But what I have found is that not being kind to yourself is so unproductive. So even if it doesn't feel it feels very genuine, just know that being unkind is really unproductive and it doesn't help you.
No.
So it serves no purpose.
It serves no purpose, and it takes practice.
Yeah, of course.
If you come from an unkind place to yourself, it takes practice, and we've covered that in our previous episode at length. I'm just using that word in the sense of be curious about what is happening and where you are, and seek help, read, research, ask people, just get
in touch with us.
Ask us any questions, and ask us anything that you might want an answer to, or if you want us to cover something specific in our next season, just feel free to ask, honestly.
Yeah.
What's the worst thing that can happen? We won't answer, but I promise we will answer.
Will. We definitely will. And on that note, guys, we're going to love you and leave you this episode. Please don't forget to give us a like, follow us on Instagram, or, certainly subscribe to our podcast, whether that's YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. If you've got any comments for us, please give us a rating too. It really helps us kind of get out there and let more people find us. And of course, if you've got any questions or any feedback or anything, don't hesitate to get in touch. We've got an email that's listed in our notes, and we're also available on Instagram.
Yes.
And on that, take care, guys.
Take care.
Bye.